Hey guys, Joe Bryant, owner of Footballguys. I want to welcome you to the 2018 Draft Dominator. We've got a couple ways that you can see this tool, and we truly think it is the key to your perfect draft. But it's available in the Google Play Store and the iTunes Store as a downloadable mobile app for tablets and phones. The other way you can see it is online in your desktop browser. We call that the Draft Dominator Online. Both ways are incredible, and the functionality is exactly the same on both platforms. The important thing to know about this are there are three separate reasons why it's the key to your draft. The first is that it's customizable. The biggest problem I see with so many fantasy owners this year, every year, is they go into their draft with a downloaded free cheat sheet somewhere that's just not tailored to their league. It's like, I liken it to cooking a recipe where you know the ingredients, but you don't know the amounts that go in each one. And that never works out well. So with this, you can tailor your draft and your values and cheat sheets specifically to your draft, and it's the perfect way to do it. The second is that it's accurate. Now, as great as this app is, it's only as good as the projections that drive it, and we feel like we have the best there. We have 4 expert staffers that input projections for each player that matters, IDP and offensive players. You have every stat that matters, and that's what drives this thing. The last part is dynamic. Now, the problem with a printed cheat sheet is it just isn't able to recalculate on the fly. And honestly, that's the same way a lot of apps do. They just basically, it's like checking off like a grocery checklist. The advantage of the Draft Dominator is it recalculates the value after every single pick. So you're always on top of runs, you're on top of droughts when people are not drafting or overdrafting. You get a recalculated value after every single pick. And that is so important and so much stronger than just the old static cheat sheets. Now, one of the big things, we'll jump into Simon here in just a second, but let me tell you one of the biggest changes we've done for 2018. As I said before, it's always important to have customizable projections, customizable rankings and cheat sheets to make it fit your league. What we've done in years past is you had to enter that manually. Now the big thing is Simon has made this where it's automatically imported. Let's walk through that, and Simon, you'll show us what we did there and what you did and how much this is going to help guys in the league this year.
Absolutely. So let's get a version of the application up. So just before we dive in, this is the desktop version that runs on all modern browsers. The mobile versions are going to look very similar. You might just be seeing sections or blocks of this screen at one time. So everything that we're going to show you today is in every version of the Draft Dominator. So we're going to go into Edit All My Leagues and just show you guys how easy it is to add some more leagues directly from the host website by importing them. So I've got a list here of my accounts. So I've just added this one account at my fancy league, although we do support Yahoo, ESPN, CBS, NFL.com, Flea Flicker, RT Sports, Fantrax. So it's certainly a lot of support out there. So if I hit this check for more leagues, it's going to search for leagues on that account. And then it's literally as easy as hitting import leagues. And it's going to work through those one by one. Now, if there's anything that you've got on your league that isn't fully supported by us, although we do support a ridiculously wide variety of stuff, we're just going to show a nice message there to you guys and let you know exactly what it is that we do and don't support. So, for instance, one of my leagues has got a double header schedule where every team plays 2 other teams a week, so that's not something we directly support. So there's just a warning there. So just check those when you import your leagues. That's it. I've now got my leagues in. So in years past, you'd have had to trawl through all of these different scoring settings, lineup requirements, but it's all done already just like that, simple as that. If you have a league that is hosted somewhere that we don't support, which is very unlikely, or your commissioner hasn't set it up for this year yet, it is easy just to click Add Leagues there, that button in the bottom right of that last view, and you can just type in a name of a league here. Okay. And that's going to add that league in, and then if you've used this app in years past to manually set up leagues, you can then set up your scoring, lineup requirements, keepers, anything else that you need there, and you've got basic settings as well if you need to change the number of teams and that kind of thing. So that's how easy it is. So we can add a draft now for one of those leagues. It's just loading a previous draft I've got in the system. So if you go to the switch drafts menu option on phones, that's going to be the 4th tab along the bottom, and then there's a new draft button. But here we've got the new draft button right there. It's then going to ask us to select the league that we want to add that draft into. And then you've got the option to choose a mock draft or a real draft. Difference between those is pretty obvious. If you're on draft day, you want to select a real draft. And if you're just practicing, you want to select a mock draft. So for this year, for right now, we'll just add a real draft in, just so we get a cheat sheet on the screen. So this is going to be very different from league to league. So you can see Gurley number 1 there, Antonio Brown number 2. That tells me this is probably a PPR league. If I were to add in just that standard league that we created, we're going to see Antonio Brown in standard scoring fall quite far down the list. So that's just one setting, PPR versus non-PPR, but really every single setting in your league makes a huge difference, which is why this new import tool is so powerful, because we're going to get all of that for the league straight away without you having to do anything, and generate the cheat sheet based on all of those factors: lineup, scoring, number of teams, auction, snake drafts, keepers, draft order, the whole lot. So
that's a perfect example there, Simon, of just what we talked about, the customizable. If you've got the 3rd pick in each of those leagues, you have dramatically different value for, Antonio Brown. Same exact projections. It's not like we have lower projections for him in the league where he's rated lower. It's just he's not nearly as valuable in that league as the other.
Right, absolutely. Last thing I'm going to show you before we move on to drafting with this tool is just how to generate a printable cheat sheet if that's what you want. Just go to the export cheat sheet option, and we've got 2 options: a printer-friendly cheat sheet or a CSV file. That if you want to do some more post-processing of the cheat sheet, that's the option you want. Most people are going to want the print-friendly one here. So you can just hit generating cheat sheet, and then you can open that up. And then you've got your cheat sheet ready to print.
Right. And those come out beautiful too. Obviously that's just better than just a list. It's got breaks, it's got, the overall list, and then the positions. It's just a really easy way to draft. But, paper's great. We talk about this a lot. I think I like Bill Belichick as much as anybody, and we know he's a paper guy. But the real value on these things comes with the dynamic ability of this thing to recalculate on the fly. And this is really where we separate ourselves with the Draft Dominator app versus the competition. Not only is this not, just like the paper cheat sheet, there's actually quite a few apps. They're really nothing more than just a, static crossing them off the list. Simon, why don't you tell us about how this works and how that users can dive into this?
Absolutely. So the big point to make here versus paper is that it's not just about what settings go on in your league. It's also about what's happened in your draft to date. So this app it's incredibly powerful. There's some of the stuff it'll do. You can see down the left-hand side, it's predicting the first round of your draft. So obviously deep into the draft, the ability to see what's going to happen between your current pick and your next pick, and the rankings will change accordingly, as well as changing for the positional needs of your draft. So the first thing we're going to note here is we've implemented this year a new star system. So obviously you've got a ton of players listed down the middle there. If we think that that player is worthy of at least consideration for the pick, we're going to put a star on them. If we think that they would make a decent pick, a good pick, we'll put a silver star on them. And the gold star is reserved for a player, if there's one gold star player, we think that's the guy you should take. 2, maybe you're thinking about Todd Gurley versus Antonio Brown. So what that's doing is just giving an instant kind of feedback to the user. Here are the players you should be thinking about on this pick.
And showing the tiers, how we think of those in tiers, basically.
Right. That's exactly it, Jay. Kind of tiers of the eligible players for this current pick. So we're then going to want to dive in a bit and research those gold star players. So just click on Todd Gurley or tap from a mobile device, and you're going to get this player card come up for Todd Gurley, as well as an impressive photo of him hurdling a Seahawk defender. We've got a detailed Footballguys view, our preseason player outlook there. You've got everything that is displayed in the cheat sheet as a column. We've got laid out here with slightly longer titles, so it's easier to see what it is. And then we've got projections for this year and past statistics from the last 3 years. We've also got latest news. Probably you want to see a nice blank window there for the early pick, guys. Probably good news. You can only go down from the number 1 pick. You can break down his fantasy points through the whole year to see what, at this point, we predict that he's going to score in each week. You can see his depth chart for his NFL team at his position. Got a bunch more staff comments and individual staff rankings here from our 60 or so Footballguys staffers. So it's just a bunch more detail, and we'll generally get the highest and the lowest rankers for each player to put a comment there as well, so you can just get some more opinions. And you've also got the ability to put in some notes for that player as well. And every player has the same amount of information, even if you scroll well down, still got the same amount of information on every fantasy relevant player. So another thing that we've improved this year is the ability to keep up with real drafts, so that you guys can get the best of that extra stuff that the app is doing once the draft starts and begins. Let's react to all the different things it's doing. So let's say we picked Gurley at number 1. We can now click on this pick at 102 and just wait for the person to make the selection, and then just in one click or tap, you can just enter these players as they get picked by your rivals. Let's say you make a mistake and it was actually Saquon Barkley at 105, and you accidentally put in DeAndre Hopkins, who was the 106 pick. In other words, you missed Barkley. You can click on Hopkins there, hit Barkley, and then hit insert. And that's going to just insert Saquon Barkley at the 105 and move everyone else down a spot. You've also got the ability to just switch him 1-for-1, the swap option here. And you can also just reset the draft to that point in time at any time as well. So this is one of the things that we've really got better at over the years with the Draft Dominator, preventing people getting into a situation where the draft picks are out of place and the data then becomes meaningless. We've also got, for each player, a watch and avoid list. So you can go through here and add these watch icons, or maybe there's a certain player that you don't like the look of. I'm just wondering who to pick on here.
You're going to make somebody mad no matter who you pick.
Certainly not Jimmy Graham. So let's go with Amari Cooper because he burnt me last year.
Yeah.
So you can put him on an avoid list, and then you've got that icon next to his name every time you do a draft from then on.
Right. And those are really valuable later on for your deep sleepers that you hey, don't forget about this guy. Let's keep an eye on him.
Absolutely. We've also got a shortlist feature for comparing players. So let's say that at this point you were stuck picking between those 4 guys. You just hit this green add to shortlist button. You can also remove them. These 2 buttons here, pick and remove. On mobile, those are replicated by dragging the player to the left or the right. And if you do that, then you'll see the different options pop up on the sides of them. This icon then up here where this yellow 4 has arrived, that's the shortlist button. So we can hit that. We've got these 4 players, and now we can get comparisons between them, combined news lists. There's their statistics for each of our projections, or you can go for past years. And you can also see the comparison week by week of how many points we think each of those players is going to get. So that can be a useful way to compare that same data that's on the player card with multiple players at one time. So the main next block that we wanted to cover in this little section is how the app is making changes as the draft progresses, and how you guys can control that and customize that behavior as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set this back to a mock draft and just motor through a couple of picks. as soon as I hit resume draft, the AI is going to take over. We've got a bit of a funky draft order in this league, so we're waiting to the 205 pick, and let's pick the same position we picked in the first round. So let's pick another running back. Let's pick Dalvin Cook. Again, max that out. Okay, so now we're at the 402 spot. You can see that the application has completely removed running backs from the draft board. We're probably going to have to go down quite far to get one. That's because of, if I hit this wrench icon is like the kind of cupboard of Narnia to all of the magic that goes on in the app. You know, if you delve into this and you work it out, you're really mastering everything that we've got on offer. So this slider here, positional need, I can uncheck automatic control of these sliders. So automatically what we're doing in the background is we're saying early on in the draft, you're not too worried about positional need, but come around 10 or so, now we need to make sure you've got a balanced roster. So the app would automatically move positional need up at that point. So what I can show you guys, if we put that down to 0, you can see that the running backs moved up a bit. I mean, there's not a whole lot of running back value on the board anyway, but Kenyon Drake's moved up a good 10 spots, and so have the other guys around him. You can also see that it's projecting. So I've got a pick at 408, which is about 6-7 picks away, and it's projecting Cam Newton, T.Y. Hilton, Larry Fitzgerald, Evan Ingram, and Jordan Howard. Now, one of the reasons why those running backs are so low is because there's only one running back projected to come off the board. So one of the things the application does is it looks at those players who are going to be available when you next pick. And if that's a bunch of wide receivers, it's going to increase the urgency that you draft a wide receiver now on the current pick, so that the ones that are available of a lesser quality next time, you don't care so much because you grab one now. That's this next pick drop-offs. So again, if I zero that out, the running backs you could see in the background just moved up a little bit again because we took away some power wide receivers from the rankings. And then this last toggle is the VBD toggle at the top. This one is just our standard. This is basically the order of the players in that printable cheat sheet that we showed right at the beginning of the video. So the other two toggles, positional need and next pick drop-offs, those are the ones that really come into play when the draft progresses and we can start reordering rankings depending on what other people are doing and what the needs of your roster are.
So, I mean, we'll put a link to the VBD is, of course, value-based drafting, something that we pioneered 25 years ago. And we'll put a link to our article in the show notes here for this about how, what exactly is value-based drafting. The other thing I always say on that, too, is it's with these positional needs and the next pick drop-offs, it's basically taking the emotion out of it. It's so easy to get caught up in a run and you see 4 quarterbacks go and you think you better grab even the guy you don't like that much or else, and you almost always wind up paying too much, too high of a draft pick for that. And with this, it just shows you it takes more of a logic approach to go, no, there's room to go better somewhere else because these other guys aren't going to be being picked here. It's just an easier way to take, I always say, just the emotion out of it versus logic.
Right. And there'd be no practical way of doing in your head these calculations.
Right.
In the draft room when you're on a 30, 60-second timer anyway.
Right.
Just to show you guys the rest of the stuff that we've got here that allows you to modify rankings in some way. Again, this slider is it's something that we automatically control for you, but if you want to take over manual control of it, then you can. It's how much do we factor in our upside, best case projections. So at the end of the draft, you're going to want this nice and high because you're going to want the sleepers, the guys who are not just going to toddle along as the third best wide receiver in their team, catching 3 balls for 25 yards. We don't want that. We want the guys who are either catching 0 because they didn't break into the team, or they've broken out in a big way and they're catching 8 or 9 for 70 plus and a touchdown. So that's a great thing to make sure that you've got nice and high late in the draft, or whenever you want to switch over to that optimistic, high risk, high reward style of drafting.
One thing important too, Simon, you can do nothing and leave it on automatic, and we'll do all this for you. Don't feel like you have to do this. This is for the guy that really wants total control, but we already have these things adjusting automatically in the auto settings.
Right, absolutely. If you disagree with any of our rankings, you can come into this section here, the edit players section, and move any of these players up or down. Just go back in here and have a look at the other options. We have 4 guys who do offensive projections and 2 guys who do IDP projections, kicker projections, and team defense projections. You can move these sliders up and down to change the priority of each projection set. So if you're a particular fan of Jason Wood, you can stick him at 100 if you want, and then the app will go entirely off his numbers. We've got it set by default to about 30, 30, 15, 15. I mean, that's just what we found to be best over the years. You can set this to whatever you want. This is a really good mix. We recommend keeping everyone in the mix to get a good balance. You can do the same at IDP and the other settings too. And the other tricks
and that's always been our strength, Simon, hasn't it? We just feel like you have, and we help each other. These projections, these guys doing these, they can be pretty heated discussions at times, but they at the end, it's sort of an iron sharpens iron thing. They will talk each other in or out of things, and we get their individual picks and projections, but there is very much a collaborative part of it as well.
Right, absolutely. There's always communication going on between those guys,
right.
like calling each other out on high, low picks and getting to the best place. You can also move whole positions up or down. A use case for this might be if you're in a 2-quarterback league, and we'll obviously move quarterbacks up for that league. If your other co-owners don't accommodate for that as much, you might want to move quarterbacks down a bit if you think you can get away with that while still capitalizing on their errors. So that just allows for some more tweaking there of how the app ranks each position for you. I think there's one more option down there, weekly weights. So this is really powerful for things like trying to concentrate on drafting a fantasy football team that performs when it matters most in your league. So a lot of leagues will have divisional games, which are more important, or you might be particularly confident of making the playoffs. So if you're particularly confident making the playoffs, you want to draft a team that has a softer schedule in the last 3 weeks of the season. So you can just move these numbers up towards 2. If you wanted to go super powerful on this, you could move all of these down to 0 as well, or certainly below 1. We'll just do this for now. And that will change things up a fair bit. It depends on what stage of the draft you're at. And certainly if you start messing around with the weeks where there's bye weeks, you'll certainly begin to see some considerable changes there.
Sometimes you see that, Simon, when there's a star player that's suspended, say, for week 1, or this coming in, you may just build your team around, tanking week 1 but strong in all the others. And it really does make a difference.
Absolutely. So another feature I want to show everyone is these bells that come up in orange and red colors. These warn you of bye week clashes. Obviously, red is a more severe clash than a yellow and orange kind of color. Like any of these tags, if you click on the player, if you don't ever know what a tag is, one of these little images that's come up here, icons, you can tap on the player, and the player card will explain it for you. So here we can see at the top, player tags, the red bell, bye week clash week 9 with the only other player at the same position. So in the last round, I drafted Larry Fitzgerald. So this is warning me that Alshon Jeffrey's on bye at the same time. So you want to be aware of how many other players. You might not mind your top 2 wide receivers being the same bye week, but after that, you're certainly going to want to avoid week 9 guys at wide receiver. The last 2 things that adapt as the draft goes on, you've got position tiers here. So this is going to break down dynamically for your league. We've got a cluster algorithm that works on this, just grouping the players together and splitting them down into tiers. So this is worth a flick through sometimes. You can change the position up here just to try and get an idea if there's, for instance, tier 3 is only just started at running back. So this might not be the best time to draft a running back. Have a look at wide receivers. Tier 4 is looking like it might all be gone perhaps in the next round or 2. So maybe that's a position we'll look at. And tight end looks like we're about to kick off a new tier. So there's just some more information there to give you guys an idea of where the value is at each position at any time in the draft.
I love that. I love seeing the buckets there. Yeah, and one more thing, just to stress again, all those are I mean, Simon and I call them power features basically, but to edit and to tweak and to move the upside or downside down, the automatic setting will do all those for you. So if you see those and think, oh, you can't use this app without making sure you get all that right, that's not the case. The automatic setting will do all that for you perfectly. This is just for the guy that really wants to tweak and go in a little bit harder. Which leads to the next point of mock drafts. If I had one advice for how people could do, aside from using a custom cheat sheet and don't get some generic free cheat sheet somewhere, the advice would be to mock, to practice. And it makes total sense. I mean, nobody would go into anything important without practicing a little bit, especially when you can. The trouble with mock drafting is lots of times it's hard. It's hard to come up with an accurate, method for doing that. And I don't know that. Well, I do know this without question. The majority of time spent on this app should be mocking. Your real draft is a one-time event, but you should easily have 10, 20, 30 mocks under your belt when you go into your real draft. There's just no reason not to think it through and see what happens. It's the same as the NFL teams. They don't just roll into Sunday unprepared. They have prepped through the week, rolled out a game plan, tried to adapt to what they're doing. There's no time to think on the field. You need to have already thought through the week when you get ready, and that's what this mock drafting ability does. But let's, Simon, if you'll show, I know you hit it on it briefly a minute ago, but show us, if you would, exactly how we do that, and let people be able to see what happens there when they mock and how that works for them.
Right, absolutely. Let's maybe stick a new draft in, switch to a standard league now. So at any time, you can create new mock drafts just from that switch drafts window. And the first thing you're going to want to do, because we do have the number one pick here, but you might not always have the number one pick. So just reload the app here to get this draft started. So the first thing you want to do is hit the start draft button, okay? And if you're not the number one pick, that's then going to kick off with the number one pick and the subsequent picks being picked, so until you're on the clock. And then we're going to use all the tools that we were discussing previously. Let's find the right player to pick. So anytime you've got a single gold star player, that's probably the guy you want. So let's kick things off with Gurley here and get into the second round. Again, we've got 2 to pick from here, gold star players. Wider selection again. And you can carry on working your way through. So the idea here, as Joe said, is you're going to want to try some different things. So we've drafted a tight end very early. So we want to see, how does that affect the tight end? How does that affect our other positions, wide receivers and running backs, who you typically draft early? So you might want to pick a quarterback early as well. And then you play through the draft. And the idea is, you say, if we're taking Deshaun Watson and Rob Gronkowski this early, what do our wide receivers and running backs end up looking like? At what point is the sweet spots for those guys in terms of rounds for your league? So we can try all these different strategies, and you're going to come out at the end of the day, be able to react to whatever happens in your draft as best as possible.
I love the sort of prove it part, Simon. It's like, you have this thought in your mind, okay, everyone says whatever it is this year, maybe this is the year to really, really wait a long time on quarterbacks, and you're nervous about that. Well, just play it through and see how your team looks, and see if it feels worthy to you, the benefits of waiting on a quarterback. That means you got to draft a better player early, and you can actually play it out. It's so much easier, or to me, I have so much more confidence going into a draft when I've seen this play out a few times, not like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be stuck with this awful team if I wait on a quarterback. Or what does it look like if you do draft an elite tight end really early? And maybe, is that needed? And would you just as soon have had it the other way? But this way gives you a super easy way to compare and try. And there's no downside if you do wind up with an awful team or a team that you don't like. And so that's you won't ever end up with an awful team with this, but you may like some of your teams way more than others, and this lets you try it without actually committing to a real draft.
Right, absolutely. That's the key, and the more you can do this, the better. Trying different strategies. One of the things that you might want to consider as well is customizing the behavior of how the other teams draft. We've got this locked in, so it's going to be trying to follow ADP for the other teams, and it's going to deviate a little bit based on your league settings and what that team's roster is at any given time. Um, and also, we like to adapt at the end of the draft because ADP becomes less useful the deeper into your
Hmm.
draft you get, because kickers and defense should really be numbered from the end of your draft, not the beginning. So we'll make some changes like that for sure. But you can actually go further as well. If you have specific tendencies in your league, you can come back in through the Narnia cupboard wrench icon there, and you can switch to other teams, and you have the ability to come in here and, well, you can actually do it from this green button here, create new profile. And you can just program in that this specific team number 2, let's say they really like Cowboys, so you can go into edit players and you can find all the Cowboys and move them up the rankings, and then that team is going to draft all of those guys higher. So you can put as much time as you want into this. If you just go straight in and mock draft against what the app does by default, like anything, it's going to be the best possible experience. If you want to give us some more information about your league, this owner prefers that team, this guy always takes a tight end in round 2, those types of things are programmable into it using the rankings profiles, adjusting positions, and adjusting players. Last thing I want to take a, sorry, Jay, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say in the preset, Simon, we always have people ask about this. The preset is assuming solid smart drafter. So you'll never, you'll rarely have a draft that you go into that's any more competitive than this. So if anything, your drafts often will your real drafts usually wind up better than your mock drafts, just because the quality, unless you're playing in a really competitive league. So I always say it's always better to train for the worst case scenario with super stiff competition than it is to train, for the lightweights.
Right, absolutely. I think the last time I used this to customize behavior for my own leagues was when I was in a league with a couple of those guys doing projections. So I could set up a rankings profile for David Dodd set at 100%, to get a very good idea of drafting exactly against his projections. We've also got some ways to compare all the teams in your league at any point as the draft progresses. So I find this by position screen really useful to get an idea of what's happened with the draft. So as you're practicing these mocks, this is always worth coming in here and having a look, after 5-6 rounds, how many running backs have been taken, how many wide receivers have been taken, what does the draft board look like? So this is just telling us, for every team in the league, how many of each position they've drafted. Also for auction drafts, that's going to tell you how many dollars they've spent at each of those positions. You can also come in here and see, for every week in the season, how many points each of those rosters is projected to score. Obviously, we're still around 14, so I think no one's had kickers or defenses really yet. So the number is a little bit lower than you might expect. But you're going to see, as you expect, kind of where the bye weeks hit around week 7, 8, those numbers are a little lower, and so on throughout the season. And then we've got bolded the playoffs there, so we know to make sure you scroll over to there and have an extra look there. One of the ways I like to use this is to find weeks in which I'm particularly weak, and then go into the weekly weights and increase that week's priority to make sure I have a balanced roster across all the weeks. So if I was drafting this team, if I was drafting team 2 here in the second row, I would be concerned with week 14, and I'd be wanting to make sure I had a better roster for week 14. So I would go into the weekly weights and just adjust that priority up. So that's everything for mock drafts.
Perfect. And you mentioned auctions, Simon, and that's everyone always asks that question as well, auctions, and the answer for that is absolutely. We don't advertise that a lot because the majority of drafts that in industry is still regular drafts, but the preferred way to play for almost all the football guys staffers are auction drafts, and it's just a more detailed, I think it's a more precise way to play. So from the very start, this app was meant to handle auctions. comes in. It actually probably is even more valuable as it comes in, as it does all the detailed math and the algorithms for you to get these precise dollar values based on how this thing unfolds. Not only where, in for the redraft or the drafting leagues, it will bump a player up or down based on runs or scarcity or things like that. With this, it obviously ups and lowers the dollar value and does it dynamically. So you may start the draft with a player at one value, and 5 rounds in, that value could be radically changed based on what's happening. And it's just simply too much to do in your head or even for the calculator there. It's just a much more logical and mathematically correct way to do it. The other big thing I ask you to talk about, Simon, is the rate my team. One big feature that we have, and probably the thing that gets me more upset email, is when once the draft is done, you can easily click a button and we will give you instant feedback on the team. And we try to be honest. So when I get angry email, it's usually someone that says that we didn't love the team that they drafted. But the good news is we always have, a resolution, what you should have done or what you can do going forward. So talk about those, Simon, and we'll wrap this up here.
Sure thing. So I've got an auction draft going here. So the amount of stuff, this is a mock draft, a mock auction draft. So the amount of math that's going on in this app right now is crazy, because all of the teams are looking at their own rosters. They're looking at how many dollars they have left, and they're coming up with a bid. And then we've actually got this live bidding room up here. So you can either continue bidding on players. Looks like I've just won Rob Gronkowski, or you can just hit this decline player button, and then the AI will very quickly bid against each other and move on to the next player. You can see over on the right hand side, it's beginning to tally up dollar amounts for each position as well. So that's actually the more relevant number now in auction drafts. We want to be looking at how much people are spending at each position, not necessarily how many players they've got at that position. That can be really useful. So right now, for instance, Jarrett McKinnon is being auctioned. Team 4 are winning the auction with $29. So you might come over here, see that Team 4 already has spent $39 on a running back, and we haven't got a running back yet. So you might feel a little more confident in outbidding them at this point. Certainly you would if you were coming up against Team 6. So that's more information there right at your fingertips, all of this stuff kind of added up for you automatically. The toggles for auction drafts are a little bit different, because we're obviously not picking players in an ordered way anymore, like in snake drafts. So we've still got the most likely versus upside projections, but then we've got this one, which is specific to auction, a balanced strategy versus studs and duds. So as the draft happens in an auction draft, the app is going to adjust in 2 ways. One way is pretty commonly known amongst auction strategists, which is to get the amount of dollars left in everyone's budgets, and then you assign that to all the players that are left at auction according to how well you have them projected. So that if people have been overpaying, you know that owner isn't going to be able to afford as many players, and certainly at higher values going forwards. The other thing to consider, though, is that you've got to find the right time in an auction draft to strike. If everyone's overpaying for the top players, then it's the ones right after that is going to be where the value is. And if people are underpaying for the top players, then you want to jump straight in for those guys. So you can change. I mean, this is kind of saying, do I want to spend 90% of my budget on 4 players would be full on studs and duds, whereas balanced would be my top 4 players are only half of my total auction budget. The app adjusts this according to what the other teams are doing. So if everyone is overpaying, it's going to see that and understand that you're going to pay more than we would originally suggest that you pay for the top guys, because you have to have some studs to win in fantasy football. But relative to the other teams, you'll still have value, and that's the key. So that's another one which automatically is controlled. But again, if you think our values are too low at the top, you want to move this towards studs and duds. If you think our values are too high at the top, then you want to move it more towards balanced, just to get the right numbers that you want. What we'll do very quickly then to show Rate My Team is just switch back to a snake draft, and then this actually allows us to show you guys one other setting we've got in here, which is to auto complete the draft. You can also trade picks as the draft progresses, and you can also reset the draft, or when it's done, you can download draft results to open in Excel. But if I auto complete the draft, that'll run through the whole draft, and then we can have a look at Rate My Team, because that really builds into the mock draft and practicing stuff as well. We first built Rate My Team on the website. It's probably 10 years ago, something like that, Joe.
Right.
And the idea originally was as a kind of a post-draft, chat amongst friends. Let's see who gets the best Rate My Team. But when we've got this mock draft system in place, we can use it to analyze the mocks we did and get a kind of an opinion in text form about whether or not that was a good or a bad strategy. So we finished the draft. We've got a link to Rate My Team up here, and here it is. So it's just a bunch of text that we've generated that you can read through. It's going to give you summaries at each position. And we're also going to tell you the best free agents available. And at the top as well, we're going to let you know whether we think you're going to get to the playoffs or not. So you can see here with great in-season management, about a 90% chance. Average in-season management, 78% chance. So that's a pretty good team. We're looking pretty good at that point. You can see it for all the other teams in your league as well. So if you've just finished a real draft, you can actually email everyone's reports to them fairly easily just by flicking through here and entering their email addresses. So that's
if you want
about
to take credit for writing those, you can. You don't have to say it came from Footballguys.
Yeah, we don't mind.
But it is a great way. And again, that it also highlights the fact that the season is a two-part process, right? You have your draft, which is hugely important, but then once week one starts, it becomes the game of managing your team throughout the league. And I will always say it is so you can salvage, a tough draft, but it is so much easier to manage a solid draft through this season. Start with the best you possibly can and move on from there. Well, Simon, thank you, buddy, for the time on this. Obviously, you can, by how quickly he's gone through there, we're just scratching the surface for what this can do. The real value in it comes from mocking, playing with it, diving in, researching. It's just an endless, wealth of information. It feels like the deeper you dive into it. On the flip side to that, it's designed to be very simple if you like it to be. You don't have to do all the editing projections or have to do the changing upside or downside. You can start and use it at a very basic level and still get fantastic results with dynamic cheat sheets that adapt and customize league settings. But that's our thing is just get in there, play with it, see it, and we think you'll love it. It's also available on the website is the Draft Dominator online, where you can also, it's older information, but you can do a free trial and see how you can play with all these same features there and see what it feels like and get a feel for it there as well. And then of course, purchasers of the app and then subscribers to the season-long Insider Pro gets updated information during the preseason. It's almost daily and hourly in some cases, so you can walk into your draft with the very latest information. Simon, thank you, buddy. We'll have information in the notes below and comments and more links to the value-based drafting article and other things. But we really dive in, see what you think, but we really are convinced this is the key to your perfect draft. Thank you.